Hi everyone, it's Phil here from Ashland Leather. Check this out. I have a really nice little color range to show you today on our one-shot card holders. One of the goals for Ashland is to share more leather with more people, specifically from Horween leather. And I thought that the one-shot card holders are a really good way for me to do that. So in my travels at Horween, I like to find different pieces of leather that Horween's working on and pick them up, anything that really strikes my fancy. So there's a lot of random things in here that I've collected over the years. We've cut into these one shots. On many of these, there's only a couple available. I think the most I have is about 5 of each color. And I'll be putting these up for sale on our flash sale page. So if you're interested in these, you can check it out over there on ashlandleather.com. But let's get started and take a look at some of these really special leathers. First here, this is the one that's probably going to blast the camera the most because this is a really vibrant yellow shade. And this is a color called yellow Rockford, which is a really nice veg leather. It's a little bit more fibrous and less dense when compared to a veg like the Dublin, which is a little bit more compact and firm. The yellow Rockford is very soft and very fibrous. In fact, it's so fibrous, I'm having a hard time getting these edges to be slick at all. And that's just because they're so loose in there. So it's a very soft, sort of tumbled feeling leather and a really nice soft feel. And I put a navy thread with these yellow Rockfords. Up next, I think this is the one that people are going to be most interested in. This is the raw Shell Cordovan on the one-shot card holder. And I think that people are going to want to experience the raw shell because I've been raving about how nicely it ages. I wore a Fat Herbie in this raw Shell Cordovan for about a year, and the transformation that's happened on it is really incredible. And here's a look at that raw Shell Cordovan Fat Herbie that I wore for a year. Now, the raw Shell Cordovan I mentioned is incredible for patina. It's the best leather that I've experienced to develop a dramatic patina. And take a look here. This is the Fat Herbie that I wore for 1 year. You can see the color is a little bit more caramel, a little bit more golden, and definitely darker. But the other thing that I think is perhaps more compelling is how bright and shiny the luster has changed. And I'll try to capture that here. You can see the raw Shell Cordovan starts off really, really dull. It's like a very subtle sheen to it, but nowhere near how it's developed to after a year. It's almost like it has layers of luster now with like a glassy, bright finish on the surface. Up next, here's another really nice one. If you're looking to get a Horween ink stamp, I was able to cut a couple Horween ink stamps into this Color 8 reverse Shell Cordovan. You can see on the inside of this one shot, this is actually the Color 8 shell. And the reverse side of it is this orangey tan shade, which is really fascinating. It has random dye marks that I really like, but also the opportunity to show off this Horween ink stamp. And we're continuing from light to dark here. This is a leather called English Tan Dublin. I love the natural grain character on the Dublin. And this English Tan has, again, a very nice sort of caramel color, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of orangeness to it. If you haven't experienced Dublin, I suggest picking up Dublin, even if it's not for me, just to see it in person. It's very much a naturally finished leather that I think is really special. I think you're doing yourself a disservice by not trying out some Dublin. And here's the second one that I think is probably going to be most popular. This is a leather that doesn't actually have an official name, but this is a one-off side from Horween. This is a tumbled deerskin. And you can see it has this really dramatic, tumbled, sort of crackly effect with little bits of darkness on the peaks and a little bit lighter undertones. It's definitely more of like a brown, a little bit yellow to it. And I think that texture is really cool. You can see the randomization here. They're all a little bit unique and a little bit random. And it has sort of a dry feel, which is really interesting. But if you haven't experienced deerskin, this one might be fun to try out. And here's another really fun one. Maybe we'll get a season of football this year, but this is official football leather that Horween makes. We picked out some thinner pieces, finished the back sides on them, and made them into these one-shot card holders. Here's another Dublin piece. This one's a little bit darker than the English Tan. This is a color called chestnut, which reads as a little bit more brown, has a little bit more red to it, especially on the pull-up that you might be able to see down the spine here. But check out the natural character on this Dublin. I've been wearing a Dublin Johnny the Fox for almost 80 days now, and I'm really enjoying how the patina is accumulating on this leather. You might have the same experience with the chestnut Dublin. Here's another Dublin set that I really like. This is a color called Russet Brown Dublin. It's definitely more red. Sometimes it reminds me of how I feel about the color 8 Shell Cordovan on the surface color, but this one definitely has more of like a vibrant red color underneath. There was a boot that Wolverine made, a 1,000-mile boot. They did a limited run in this color that happened to have been my favorite boots that 1,000-mile made. If you're interested in checking them out, they're called the Kraus boots, made in this russet brown Dublin. We're getting a little darker here. This is a color called color number 4 Shell Cordovan, and for a bunch of years, this was my favorite shell color. I just sort of love that caramel shade, medium brown, like reddish undertones. I think it's a really beautiful color, and we have color 8 here as well. And let's compare these quickly. You can see the color 8 is a little bit more cherry, a little bit more purple, and slightly darker. And the color 8 is that classic Shell Cordovan color. A lot of people haven't experienced Shell, so I think the one-shot card holders with the lower price point is a good opportunity to put one of these in your pocket. There's something special about seeing this leather, and in fact, all the Horween stuff in person, because it's very much a sensory experience. When you open up the box from us, you'll be able to smell this sort of intoxicating Cordovan smell immediately, and it's really pleasant. And it's a unique scent that a lot of people send me photos with their noses inside of their wallets, which I think is really fun. So the Shell Cordovan is something that you have to experience, especially because of how it develops and changes the more that you wear it. It's kind of like a pair of raw denim, where it becomes part of your style and sort of forms to whatever you put in it. Now here's another fun leather that I've never shown on here before. This is a leather from Horween called Latigo in a color called Regatta Blue. And I remember picking out this side from Horween. I just really liked this color. That was a nice, vibrant blue shade. The Latigo is very grainy. It has a really nice grain character to it, but it's much drier and less waxy when you compare it to something like the Chrome Excel. So the Chrome Excel is really rich and oily and greasy. The Latigo is much more dry, more of like a natural veg sort of feel to it. And then the Horween Latigo has a nice roundness to it. So it doesn't have that like cardboardy feel like a lot of veg tans do. The Latigo is a combination tan leather, so it's chrome tan with a veg retan. Now here's a fun one. This is also another leather that I don't think I've really shown on here before. This is a color called Blue Vintage, which is very similar to this slate vintage, but with more blue tones to it. And I really like this color. And vintage is cool because it has a really silky feel. It's like incredible just to sort of like rub your finger over. It's super, super smooth, but it also has this really fun burst effect to it. So there's a tone on the top. The color is a little bit darker on the surface, and you can see where it's been flexed here. The undertones are a little bit lighter. And what's really fun about the vintage is if you just polish it, the spine here tends to get darker. So you can sort of always flex out the color, make it lighter. And then if you rub it in with your fingernail, you can get it a little bit darker. Here's another piece of vintage, but this is a color called Slate. And I like this one very much because there's not a lot of gray leathers around. So if you're into gray, this is the only gray that I've really found. And I put a gray thread with this one. The Slate Vintage has that same effect where it's able to be burnished back in. So you can get the color darker just by rubbing your fingernail over it. You sort of melt the waxes and smooth down the surface. The Vintage also has this really silky feel that's unique to the Vintage. Here's a fun one. I only have one of these. This is a leather called Essex, which is very similar to the Dublin leather. And the Essex is the same as Dublin, except it does not have a wax surface coat. So this is just a full grain aniline finished leather with no wax. It's drier, less waxy feeling than the Dublin. It has a little bit less of a draggy feel. So I don't know if luxurious is the right word, but it has like a little bit more of like a sexy feel to it as opposed to like a waxy feel. And here's a couple fun black reverse pieces. On the one-shot card holder, check out the Horween ink stamps that we were able to cut just about perfectly on these. I like the black reverse for all the random die marks, but also the Horween ink stamp. You can see it's obviously not black on the outside at all. It's the reverse side of the black Shell Cordovan tend to be a little bit more green tones, sometimes forest green, sometimes a little bit more tan. And speaking of green, here's another green piece that I don't think we've ever shown before. This is a leather called Chrome Excel in a color called Loden Green, and that is super cool. This one has a texture on it called Scotch grain, which you often find in a lot of more dressy footwear. And I think it looks really cool on this green color. You can see the color of the Loden green has that same sort of pull-up effect where it's lighter, where we flex and crease the leather. It's a little bit more yellow on those undertones and a little bit more forest green on the surface. And last up, the darkest color, we've got black Shell Cordovan here. Take a look at that awesome black shell. There's something magical about the way the light reflects off of black shell. It just has this really interesting modern look. So we got a bunch of different pieces here today, and I don't know what the stunner is going to be, but I think it's going to be notable to point out the stuff that's new. So I think this deerskin, never seen before. This Scotch grain, Loden green, never seen before. That's really cool. Never really shown this blue vintage before. I think that's awesome. This regatta blue we've never seen. I think we've seen this before, but I'm going to point it out again. So the russet brown Dublin is really cool. So we got a lot of really great colors. Oh, I didn't show the yellow Rockford. That one too. So we have a lot of really interesting leathers and new things that I haven't done before. I like this idea of sharing more leather with more people. And that's sort of the goal again for Ashland. So if you're into one of these one shots, maybe you want to try out a different leather like the deerskin or the Scotch grain Chrome XL. Pick it up on the flash sale page of Ashland Leather. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. But until next time, I hope you have a good one.